Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel. I'm so delighted you've joined me tonight, and I hope you're going to get yourself a lovely hot cup of drink because the days are getting colder as we begin to welcome in the winter months. So you need to keep yourself swaddled with lots of warm clothes and plenty of warm drinks. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with part 2 of the story.
Look, ma'am, he had told my Aunt Helena, I think we can establish you've had a fall of some sort, he said to her, his face registering grave concern.
A fall? Asked Aunt Helena, looking somewhat bemused. What do you mean I must have had a fall?
Well, ma'am, it would easily explain your lapse of memory. You possibly tripped over something on the forest floor. It's treacherous enough in those woods. Maybe you fell over a burgeoning root, hit your head against a rock. There are lots of rocks on that trail, and after the recent rainfall, I wouldn't mind betting some of them are rather slippery. Yes, I can see you've got a bad gash on your head. You're covered in dry blood. It's all over your clothes. You've got yourself scratched up, and there are bruises all over you. Can you at least remember what happened? For a start, how did you get that gash on your head? It looks pretty nasty. At the very least, you're going to need some stitches on that scalp. I can take you to the hospital to get fully examined if you like. You do need to be looked over by a doctor. I think you're possibly concussed from the fall, which is why your memory is somewhat impaired. Maybe you've even sustained some bruising on your brain. You will be in safe hands in the hospital, I am most sure. They will be able to establish what is going on with you. But I can't possibly leave you here on your own, in this rather precarious state, ma'am. If you don't want to come with me, I could easily call the emergency services on your behalf, and I'm sure they'll be here in a tick, and take you to the hospital themselves.
My rather befuddled aunt placed her fingers on the back of her scalp and examined the blood that came off onto her fingers. "It's blood," she said, staring at the farmer with wide eyes. "You're right. I've been bleeding on my head, and it feels very swollen on this part of my head. I can feel a very big bump over here."
"That's right, ma'am. Your head looks rather swollen. You have been bleeding. The gash on your scalp is nasty. It looks like it's going to need stitches at the very least. But at least the blood has dried up and congealed significantly. But my guess is you might have bled out a lot. Are you sure, quite sure that you can't remember what happened?"
"What happened?" said Aunt Helena, looking puzzled again. She stared blankly at the farmer. "What did happen?" she repeated, as if she suddenly thought the farmer might be able to tell her why she was in such a delirious state. She looked at him hopefully, as if he might have the answers she was looking for, that might clear away some of the fog of her confusion.
"I was hoping you'd be able to tell me that yourself. As I was saying, I wonder why you took a fall like that. Can you remember at least why you were in the woods in the first place? Were you taking a stroll, perhaps? Possibly you were going to visit the waterfall there, or swim in one of the rock pools. People often go there to take a dip on a hot summer's day. And let's not kid, it's been hot recently. Can you remember anything at all? Even if you can remember something very small, it might inspire your memory to come bouncing back."
Aunt Helena seemed to think about what the farmer was saying. Finally she conceded. I'm so sorry. I just can't remember anything. I just don't understand why. I just can't."
"So you don't remember even taking a tumble of some kind?"
"Well, I do think I definitely fell. That would explain the big bump on my head. And it's really hurting. I've got a thumping headache."
"I'm not surprised," said the farmer sympathetically. "As I said, a nasty head wound is not going to feel very good. I imagine it's very swollen and sore. Not to worry. You've probably just sustained a concussion. But I'm sure you're going to be as right as rain soon enough. The main thing is we need to get you help, and you mustn't stress about it at all."
"But why can't I remember anything?"
Aunt Helena asked the farmer. Well, ma'am, as I keep saying to you, you must have a slight concussion. That would explain the absence of your memory. But we'll take you to the hospital, and I would be very happy to do so myself, to get you checked out. But I don't know you from a bar of soap, said Aunt Helena. I've never seen you before a single day in my life. You could be a very dangerous man for all I know. Ma'am, I'm not dangerous, said the farmer, unable to hide the amusement on his face, as if he found the very idea that Aunt Helena thought that he might be dangerous was hilariously funny. If you must know, ma'am, I wouldn't even hurt a fly. Actually, that's not entirely true, the farmer confessed. I absolutely abhor flies. I put traps around the place for them everywhere. They bother the cows and horses all the time. So yes, I'm very guilty of killing a ton of flies. I also kill termites and snails that eat my vegetables. But beyond that, I'm rather a nice guy, actually. My name is Hans Bateman, and I'm called Hans because my mother was German and was determined that I should have a German name. You kill flies, said Aunt Helena, considering Hans's words. Then she smiled at the farmer triumphantly. I kill flies too. I really abhor them. Nasty, dirty things they are. They spread disease, don't they? I also can't stand mosquitoes of any kind. Aunt Helena suddenly seemed terribly pleased with herself, that she finally remembered something about herself, and she knew she hated mosquitoes, and that in itself seemed like a promising start. There you go, ma'am, said Hans. We have more in common than you know. Are you married, Hans? My Aunt Helena asked him. No, I'm not. My wife, I'm afraid, died of breast cancer 3 years ago. Terrible tragedy it was, but it's one of those things. What about you, ma'am? Are you married? That's a good question, of which I don't know the answer to. I can't remember. Can you believe that? I was actually hoping that you might know. If I was married, I mean. You say you've seen me around before. Maybe you've seen me with a man in town. I'm not wearing a ring on my finger. If I was married, surely I'd be wearing a ring. Well, then maybe you're not married, ma'am, because you're not wearing a ring. And I have seen you around town before, and you've always been on your own, or sometimes with another woman that looks a lot like you, so I think she might be your sister or something. As I was saying, ma'am, before we change the subject of conversation, I don't mean to repeat myself, but I'm worried you might already have forgotten what I was saying. But we need to do something about that head wound of yours. I'd like to call the emergency services on your behalf, if I may. I'm quite happy to stay with you while we wait for them to arrive. They can take you to the hospital. It really is no skin off my nose. What way you want to do things. My only concern for you, ma'am, is to get you to safety. I'm extremely worried about your well-being. You need that wound of yours investigated to make sure nothing more serious is going on with you. Head injuries can be notoriously unpredictable, and my guess is, judging by your current state, you do need immediate attention. I need to see a doctor, said Aunt Helena. You do, ma'am, Hans assured her. Why don't you come with me if you don't want to go with the emergency services? I can take you very quickly to the hospital. Aunt Helena studied the farmer. Finally she nodded her head in agreement. Well, you look like a good man. I think I can trust you. I do think I'm a good judge of character, even though I can't remember very much about myself. And you do say you hate flies. So I guess we're on the same page. Hans was surprised that Aunt Helena had willingly agreed for him to take her to hospital in his Land Rover Discovery, and he wasted no time in getting her there before she changed her mind. He said my aunt was quite reflective during the drive, complaining that she didn't even recognize the scenery, that everything looked strange and unfamiliar to her, and that in itself seemed to scare her exponentially. When she arrived at the hospital, as luck would have it,
One of the local nurses, a lovely young lady called Susan, who was on duty, knew my Aunt Helena very well. She claimed Aunt Helena had given her tennis lessons every Saturday morning the previous summer. She said Aunt Helena had taught her to play a mean game of tennis. She also said that Aunt Helena was not married, but she had a sister called Bridget, who had a son. She said that she had taken tennis lessons on Bridget's extensive property, which had ample tennis courts. So that was why my mother, thanks to this nurse called Susan, was immediately notified of Aunt Helena's enigmatic condition, that had certainly aroused much curiosity and speculation among the nursing staff and doctors at the hospital, who could not fathom how my aunt had sustained such an injury. My mother informed the doctors that Aunt Helena taught tennis on the tennis courts at our property, and on a hot summer's day, after teaching tennis, she'd regularly ride her mountain bike down the woodland trail in the woods, where she'd take a dip in one of the rock pools there. It turned out that that is what she must have done, as my mother went to check the rock pool and found Aunt Helena's bicycle propped up under a tree and her wet swimming costume rolled up tightly in a towel that was left in the bicycle basket. The wet costume simply suggested that Aunt Helena had enjoyed a swim, changed her clothes, and it was when her swim was over that something must have happened to her that had resulted in her acquiring the mysterious injury. Aunt Helena was a lot like my own mother Bridget. Both of them were outdoorsy sort of people. They loved to take walks and bicycle rides and enjoy all kinds of outdoor pursuits. So what had happened to her on that unassuming day invited more questions than answers, and of course a whole lot of speculation. My mother had rushed to the hospital with me at her side. She couldn't find a babysitter at the last minute, and as my dad was flying a millionaire client to a private island, he couldn't be roped in to look after me. So I was dragged along to the hospital. I didn't mind a bit. I was extremely worried about my aunt's condition and wanted to see her for myself. I remember when I first laid eyes on Aunt Helena in hospital, I discovered she was in a right state. The nurses were trying to clean up her injuries. They mopped up some of her superficial scratches, grazes and bruises with antiseptic lotion. Aunt Helena complained bitterly that it hurt. The doctors couldn't fathom how it was that my aunt was also covered in scratches and bruises. If she had fallen over and hit her head, that was one thing, but it certainly did not explain how she acquired so many bruises and scratches all over her body, which only made the mystery of what had happened to her all the more baffling. "Helena! Oh, goodness gracious, I've been so worried!" cried my mother, on seeing my aunt propped up in her hospital bed against a pile of feathery pillows. Aunt Helena looked bemused, rather glassy-eyed, and barely even noticed my mother. "I was so terrified that something dreadful had happened to you. Oh, my word! Look at you! You gave me quite the shock, you did. I'm so glad you're all right, and that at least you're compos mentis," said my mother, rushing forward to Aunt Helena and impulsively throwing her arms around Aunt Helena. Aunt Helena's eyes grew wide and almost hostile. "I don't know who you are," she cried out indignantly. She pushed my mother away from her. "You're hurting me, really hurting me. Can't you see I've got bruises all over my body? You're squeezing me hard. Get away from me, will you?" "Better not touch her, ma'am," the nurse suggested kindly to my mother. "Sorry, and you are?" "I'm Helena's sister," my mother said. "I'm Bridget Stevenson. This is my son Hunter. He's 10 years old. We're here to see Helena. We got a call from the hospital telling us she'd acquired some kind of a head injury and appears to have memory problems. We've been so worried about her condition, but at least she's up and about." "I'm afraid she does have a head wound," the nurse admitted. "Helena's a little confused at the moment." Aunt Helena looked at my mother with wide, disbelieving eyes. "A sister?" she said, shaking her head vigorously. "I don't have a sister. I would remember something like that, I'm most sure. She's lying, nurse. Tell her to go away. She is not my sister." At this my mother looked grievously upset. It was a shock to hear Aunt Helena talking like this. My mother managed a half-hearted smile. "I am your sister Helena. We're very close, you and I.
We both teach tennis together, at my house on our tennis courts. We're always seeing each other every single day of the week. And if you don't remember, this is your nephew Hunter. Surely you remember him at the very least." "Why are you lying?" said Aunt Helena. "I don't know who you are. I would remember if I had a sister or a nephew. You don't look remotely familiar to me. Go away. Nurse, please tell this dreadful woman to go away. I don't know her from Adam. I don't want her here in the ward with me, spitting out all these outrageous lies. I don't know why she wants to pretend to be my sister, but I certainly don't want to be around a woman like her." The nurse gently guided us out of the hospital ward. She told us in a low, encouraging voice not to get too unduly alarmed, as when people lost their memories, their behaviour could become erratic at times. "Don't worry, Mrs. Stevenson. Don't take it to heart. I know it's distressing, your sister being so indifferent and aloof. But don't take offence to this. I'm sure when the bruising on her brain has subsided, or whatever it is that has caused her amnesia, she'll remember you soon enough. You go home, Mrs. Stevenson, for a couple of hours or so, and come back, and maybe your sister will be a bit more obliging then. I'll keep you updated on her progress. You can visit her as often as you like." My mother nodded. "That's very kind of you. I think I will come back in an hour or so to see how she's doing." She had held my hand, and we trailed across the car park towards our parking space. And once my mother had climbed in the car and settled in her seat, she burst into tears. It had really distressed her, seeing Aunt Helena so disorientated and so obviously confused. I think she was secretly worried that Aunt Helena might never remember who she was. "I'm so sorry. Look at me, Hunter. I do apologize. I'm being so silly. None of this is your aunt's fault, and I'm just overreacting to everything. The nurse is absolutely right. I'm sure your Aunt Helena will remember me soon enough." "Mum, you mustn't get so upset about it. I'm sure she will remember us soon." "I hope she does, love, and I'm sure she will. It's just so upsetting, isn't it, seeing your Aunt Helena in such a dreadful condition? I can't believe this has happened to her. It's such a nightmare." I hated to see my mother so grievously upset. We did, of course, visit Aunt Helena a couple more times that day, and on one occasion she mistakenly mistook my mother for a nurse. "Oh, nurse, I wondered how long it would take you to get here. I'm hungry. I haven't eaten anything all day." It turned out that my mother had eaten only minutes before. How could she have forgotten that already? The doctors had told me and my mother that there was no point in hanging around at the hospital, that we needed to go home and relax, and that they would be shortly in touch with us to tell us the result of my aunt's scans. The rest of the day, my mother walked around the house on tenterhooks. She was like a wild, untamed animal in a zoo enclosure, going up and down in circles. It was absolutely exhausting to watch her in this state. When the phone rang, my mother almost jumped out of her skin. She looked at me, held her breath, and hurriedly dashed over to the landline to answer it. "Hello? Hello?" She listened to the other caller on the other side and said, "But are you sure? What do you mean gone? What on earth do you mean gone? How can that be?" When she put down the receiver, she looked agitated and distressed, rather like a deer caught in headlights, as if she didn't know quite how to react. For a moment she seemed lost for words, as if her tongue was tied. She began to hold her heart with her hand, as if she thought she was about to have a heart attack and crumple over on the floor. Whatever my mother had been told, the news was not good. Or why would she react so dramatically to what she'd heard on the phone? For a moment her eyes rolled in the back of her head, and in that second I thought she was going to pass out and fall over. "Mum!" I said, running over to her. "Are you all right? You looked as if you were about to faint. It's Aunt Helena, isn't it? Is Aunt Helena all right? She's not dead, is she? Please don't say she's dead, Mummy. She's not dead, is she?" I asked. My mother was breathing heavily. She looked at me through wide eyes. She began to suddenly regain her composure. as if she suddenly realized that she was causing me a great deal of disquiet. "Oh, I'm so sorry to scare you, love. I did almost faint, goodness gracious me. It's been quite the day, that's all. One shock after another. That phone call wasn't the hospital. It wasn't about your Aunt Helena," my mother said. She held me close to her. I could smell her apple shampoo. "I'm quite sure you've got nothing to worry about and that Aunt Helena is doing fine. Where on earth did you get that dreadful idea that she might be dead? Goodness gracious me, love. You saw her earlier on in the hospital, and granted she's a little dazed and a bit confused, but she's not going to die, that's for sure. Don't get any ideas like that." "But I thought she was dead, Mummy, because I heard you say on the phone, 'What do you mean gone?' I thought you were saying that Aunt Helena might have gone. I thought that maybe she'd wandered off in a daze because she's so confused, or that she died in bed, like Max did when he died in the azalea bush." "Honestly, love, listen to yourself. You do allow your imagination to go into overdrive at times. What am I going to do with you? You're incorrigible, love. No, your Aunt Helena is doing fine, I'm most sure. But as you know, her memory is impaired. But I'm sure we'll get her back soon enough. The doctors are reasonably optimistic about her condition." "But if Aunt Helena is all right, then why are you so upset, Mummy? You looked as if you were going to have a heart attack." "Well, I told you, love, that it wasn't the hospital that called, did I not? Unfortunately, it was airport control that phoned me." "What do you mean, airport control phoned you? Is Daddy all right?" "Well, that's it, love. I really don't know the answer to that question. We can only hope. Your father was flying over the Bermuda Triangle, on the way back from dropping off a client and an entourage of his friends to his privately owned island. On your father's return flight, he was the only one in that plane, and it went inexplicably missing on the radar. They can't currently locate the flight. That's why they phoned me. They're keeping me updated and informed." "What do you mean, Mummy? Why has Daddy's flight gone missing? I don't understand." "It just means, love, they can't locate the whereabouts of your father's plane," said my mother. "We have to hope and pray he's going to be all right. I'm sure they will pick up the signal soon enough. As I was telling you, they're keeping me updated all the time. I tell you what, love, how about you go and get us a big glass of Coca-Cola each, with lots and lots of ice? I don't know about you, but I fancy something very fizzy and sweet to drink, because I've had a bit of a shock and so have you." I knew my mother was using that ploy to get me away from the telephone, as I sneakily suspected that the moment my back was turned, she would likely be phoning her mother to tell her the news. I nodded my head obligingly and agreed to get us both glasses of sweet Coca-Cola, but I sneakily eavesdropped on the conversation that my mother was having with my grandmother by picking up the receiver in the kitchen as stealthily as I could, hoping with all my heart that my mother wouldn't hear the click on the other end of the receiver. I knew something bad must have happened to my father. I didn't want my mother keeping anything from me, and I suspected she was not being forthcoming with all the information. I wanted to hear it all. At 10 years old, I might have been young, but I deserved to know exactly what was going on. "Hello, dear. This is a surprise," came my grandmother's voice. "I didn't expect you to call. How are you doing, love?" "Oh, Mum, I just don't know how to start." "Oh, goodness gracious me, love. You sound distraught. Is everything all right? You're not worried about Helena, are you? I've only just come back from the hospital, you know. You'll be very glad to know I've got an update, and it's good news. Dr. Levine believes that the amnesia is due to some bad bruising on her brain. They believe when the swelling comes down that Helena will regain her memory. And even if she doesn't, love, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. There is no reason for you to get so distraught about this. There are also ways of helping people remember. There are photographs, stuff like that. And that's what we will embrace if the worst comes to the worst. As Dr. Levine says, we need to take each day one step at a time. There's no need for us to concern ourselves too much at this stage. Time is a healer, love. We must just exercise some patience, that's all, love. Many patients, after suffering a bout of amnesia, go on to make a full and swift recovery. The nurse told me that you visited the hospital several times this afternoon. She said you were in quite the state, because Helena literally threw you out the first time you visited, claiming that you were lying that she was your sister. She says that caused you undue upset. Is that really necessary, love? You shouldn't be taking this personally. Amnesia does a lot to your brain. It can make people behave rather strangely. I know how desperately close the two of you are. But honestly, love, you shouldn't let this get you down. You sound very, very distressed, and I'm extremely worried about you. I think I'm more worried about you than Helena. I've never known you to be so inconsolable with grief like this. I can hear it in your voice. Anyway, when it comes to Helena, I simply can't understand where that sister of yours got that head wound from. Honestly, why does she keep going to those rock pools? And especially since we had so much rain recently. One of those rocks was probably so slippery she fell and hit her head. That is what must have happened. It just doesn't bear thinking about. Your sister gave a tennis lesson to a young lady, and then walked off in a huff, as you said. She took her bicycle and rode to the woodgrove, where she went to swim at the rock pools. You weren't going to see her until the following morning because you had no more tennis lessons to give. And so goodness knows, she could have been in that woodgrove all night, and no one would have known the better. Thank goodness the farmer found her, in quite the state he did. I'm just so grateful for him. I really am. God forbid she's still wandering around those woods. It just does not bear thinking about at all. Mum, why is it when one thing goes wrong, everything goes wrong at the very same time? It's so damn unfair. I can't believe this is happening. First it was Max dying, then it's Helena not remembering a bloody thing, and being found wandering around the woodgrove in a complete daze, after a tennis lesson she gave. My mother started to burst into tears, and for a while you could hear her sobbing down the phone. I was alarmed to hear my mother so decidedly distressed. My grandmother was very quiet for a moment, and in her very soft voice I heard her say, "Bridget, spit it out. This isn't all about Helena, is it? It's something else going on. It's not just your sister. You're scaring me. What happened? Please, God, Hunter's all right, is he? Nothing's happened to my favourite grandson. Please, no." "Hunter's fine, Mum. I'm not talking about him. It's Anton." "What about Anton, love? Your husband is all right, I hope." "Mum, his plane has gone missing. It's vanished from the radar. Completely vanished. They can't see it anywhere." "What do you mean, love, his plane has gone missing? What are you saying?" "Mum, I'm saying that his plane has gone missing on the radar. What if he's dead? What if I've lost Anton? What if I never see my husband again? What if I have to raise Hunter without any help, without his father? He's so broken already about losing Max. Now his aunt doesn't know what day of the week it is, let alone her own name. And now his father's plane has gone missing. I'm so terrified, Mum, absolutely terrified. I don't know what to do with myself. Planes don't go missing, do they? He must have crashed into the Atlantic Ocean. He could be dead, even as I speak. Oh, my God, Mum, he could be dead." "You don't know that for sure, love. You really mustn't panic like this. You're going to have a heart attack if you continue like this. Where did you say he was flying to? I thought he was staying with you for the weekend." "No, he was, but he changed his mind at the last minute, because he was dropping off some rich multimillionaire to his private island. I didn't want him to go. It was a last-minute thing. The millionaire decided he fancied a break. These rich people, Mum, they make me sick. They think they can click their fingers at you and you'll come running at a moment's notice. It's pathetic. And you know what Anton's like. He agreed to fly this rich man on his private jet to the island, and on the way back his plane just vanished from the radar. He flew over the Bermuda Triangle. His signal vanished. They say they're not getting a signal at all, but they'll keep me posted. There is no way this is good news, Mum. Nothing good can come from this. I have to prepare myself for the very worst, don't I? What if Anton's dead? What if his body, worse still, is never recovered? What the hell do I tell Hunter? He's so broken up and vulnerable at the moment, especially after Max's death. And he was very distressed to learn about Aunt Helena's bizarre condition. A while ago he thought that she must have died in hospital. And now this has happened to his own father. It never rains, it pours. I feel as if the whole world is collapsing in on my head. What am I going to do, Mum? I'm scared half to death. Sweetheart, listen to yourself. You're being neurotic. You need to calm down and keep your head on your shoulders, and firmly so. The good news is there is no good news yet. I do know they say there are stories about the Bermuda Triangle, where planes go disappearing, never to be seen again. But I'm sure that has not happened to your Anton. I'm quite sure of it. Anton's flown over the Bermuda Triangle hundreds of times, Mum. Nothing like this has ever happened to him. Now there's no sign of his plane. I asked airport control if Anton had reported any trouble while flying the plane. They said he was in good spirits one moment, and then there was no communication with him the next. So nothing makes any sense, does it? Sweetheart, you don't know what has happened. I keep reiterating this, and you must listen. You must keep your head firmly on your shoulders. You mustn't jump to any wild conclusions like you did with your sister. You always fear the worst. You're quite an alarmist. You need to be positive and very stoic for Hunter's sake. You know what they say. No news is good news, and I firmly believe that. I'm sure everything is going to be absolutely fine. You're taking up all this valuable time talking to me. For all you know, airport control might desperately be trying to get hold of you right now to give you great news. Maybe they've already spotted your husband's plane on the radar. I've got very good instincts about things. I'm sure if anything untoward had happened to Anton, I'd feel it in my gut. I've always been very intuitive like that. Look, love, I will be praying for Anton. Sometimes a plane can drop lower than the signal, which means they can't always be picked up on radar. I know that happens. Anton even told me about it. Maybe he had to fly low for some reason. So don't get too unduly alarmed yet. I'm sure they'll spot his plane soon enough. He didn't report anything untoward happening in his plane, so there's no point in getting alarmed yet. But, Mum, don't you get it? When you've lost a signal, you've lost a plane. That can only mean one thing. Anton's plane has gone down, possibly in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. He could be dead, Mum. What about poor Hunter? He won't have a father. Why is this all happening, all at the same time? All this anguish. I can't take it. It's too much. Pull yourself together, love. You really need to. You can't break down like this. You have Hunter to consider. He needs his mother to be strong for him. Your breaking down is going to be very distressing for him. You do need to hold it together, love. We need to end this call right now so you can wait for news from airport control. Even as I speak, they could be trying to get through to you. When my mother put down the receiver and ended her call with my grandmother, I hurriedly ran into the hallway. My mother stood by the hall table, staring down at the telephone rather blankly. Her face had grown completely white, and her whole body was trembling and shaking. "Mummy! Mummy!" I said. "Is Daddy going to be all right?" "You told Granny he might have crashed into the ocean. You said he might be dead, like Max." This time I was the one that burst into tears. "Daddy isn't dead, is he, Mum? What if his plane is at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean? What if he can't breathe?" My mum ran forwards towards me, Dropping to her knees, she draped me in a curtain of her love. You heard me speaking to your grandmother on the kitchen phone, didn't you? You listened in to our call. That was naughty of you, Hunter. You shouldn't have done that. I was speaking to your grandmother about adult things that I don't want little children like yourself to overhear. I'm a big boy, Mummy. I don't want you keeping secrets from me. You're right, love. It's not good to keep secrets. It's best to know what's going on. Don't get upset, love. It's too premature to get overwrought at this stage, as your grandmother wisely pointed out to me. If your father was flying his plane low over the Atlantic Ocean, he might not have been spotted on the radar. That is a possibility. We don't know anything at all. They're saying there aren't any signals at the moment, or any communication from your father. They can't locate his plane. But that could change, so we mustn't despair at this stage. You heard your grandmother. She said no news is good news, and she's right about that. We need to keep our fingers crossed and pray for the very best. But what if Daddy's plane fell out of the sky and dropped into the ocean? He could be dead like Max, and no one will be able to wake him up. Remember, we couldn't wake up Max, could we? We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, my mother said, leaning forward towards me and wiping away a tear with a tissue she was holding. I could see she was desperately trying to compose herself for my sake, but she did not succeed in disguising her obvious anguish. We both jumped out of our skins when the landline finally began to ring. My mother looked like a frightened rabbit, too scared to answer the phone, as if she'd spotted a poisonous tree frog in beautiful colours that she longed to touch, but was desperately afraid it would ultimately kill her if she did. I couldn't blame her for her obvious reluctance to answer the phone, for the fear of bad news it might present. Finally, my mother found her courage. She drew in a deep breath and answered the telephone. So there we are. That is the end of part 2 of our story. Part 3 is tomorrow night. I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.